The story of Noah's Ark probably isn't one that you typically associate with the season of Lent. And yet here we are, the first Sunday of Lent, listening to that story from the book of Genesis that we all learned when we were kids. Now, if you just bear with me today, we're going to get a little deeper, a little more theological. Because Noah's Ark has a long and proud tradition of being understood very symbolically. The first and most obvious piece of symbolism from that story is associating Noah's Ark, the boat itself, with the church. Cardinal Sean O'Malley, the Archbishop of Boston, once put it very well when he said, it's a reminder that we're not making the journey of salvation alone. We're all in it together inside the church. And just like on a boat, sometimes people get seasick. Sometimes the water gets choppy and bumpy. Occasionally someone will fall overboard. But in the end, it's better to make that journey together than all alone on a dinghy in the middle of the ocean. The symbolism doesn't stop there, though. If you remember back to that story, it rained for 40 days and 40 nights. Now, for all of us beginning the season of Lent, that should obviously remind us of something. But the waters of the Great Flood are also supposed to represent the waters of baptism. Not just because they're wet, but because just like in the sacrament of baptism, it's calling to mind a recreation. God reshaping, reforming what he has made. In the story of Noah's Ark, it's the entire earth. In baptism, it's each of us. There's another piece of symbolism in the story of Noah's Ark that maybe is a little more controversial, that would be a little tougher to find, but I think is equally powerful. If you remember the other time the entire earth was covered with water, at the very beginning of the creation story in the book of Genesis, you might remember the language that God breathed over the waters. That divine breath, that ruah in Hebrew, has always been associated for us as Christians as the Holy Spirit. Well, at the end of the story of Noah's Ark, the portion right before what we read this Sunday at Mass, we hear that a dove isn't the only bird that Noah sends out over the waters. He also sends a raven. Now, it's always been a little tricky for people to understand what exactly that raven is supposed to represent. And over the years, there have been a lot of different theories. But one that I am really fond of comes from just the way the Hebrew in the passage works. And it turns out that the language of the raven flying back and forth over the waters is very similar to the language of the breath of God flowing over the waters in the very beginning of creation. And so if you put all of these different symbols together, it gives us a real purpose for the season of Lent. In the season of Lent, we, coming together as a church, are called, like the raven, to take part in God's recreation of what he has made. Just like the raven in the story of the flood, God doesn't need us to make his work happen, but he's inviting us to take a part in what he is doing. He is inviting us to participate in the incredible grace, the incredible transformation that is at work. So this Lent, as we begin, think of that story of Noah's Ark. Think of the church. Think of the raven. And remember that what we are called to during this season is nothing less than taking part in God's recreation of the world. It is an incredible invitation, responsibility, and blessing that we are called to together this Lent.